Yeah, that drum beat signaling the arrival of Peter Wickham, who we know slept last night because he's looking a little fresh. How you doing, Peter?
You'd be very surprised, Colin.
Yeah, that was hanging out on a branch, hanging out on a limb.
The coffee and the good makeup work of Joanna is
it can be misleading.
Yeah, the extent to which it can be misleading.
All right, well, let's look at something that, well, it's not misleading. I guess one might have the arguments about it. But
it's a different perspective on politics, and you know the good thing about being a researcher is that we get to research issues that are non-political. Well, of course, this one is political in a way, but not directly political. And I'm always happy when I can have a discussion on something that is not directly related to politics. Yeah, so the 11+. I mean, it's very much in the news these days. You know, the results were better this year, and as a result, more people are asking for transfers. And I just thought it would be useful to bring a discussion to you to look at some of the issues related to 11+, and particularly the whole sociology of support for it. And it is a fascinating thing for me, largely because when you look at the 11+, it is actually quite popular. You know, I don't see that there's any real question as to the assessment and the need for an assessment at that age, but I think we have difficulties with the allocation. So the ministry is happy that the results overall are better. It basically means that students are working harder and they're doing better. The problem is that once you have to do an allocation, then we have to separate what I call the sheep from the goats. And usually the sheep are quite happy, but the goats are somewhat unhappy, and the parents of the goats are somewhat unhappy. And this is where the problem that I personally have begins. Last year, the UNICEF, when government was doing the big research project on education, that was one of the issues that was included. UNICEF sponsored a major survey on major educational issues, and we had the opportunity to go into the field yet again and test people's views and opinions on the 11+. And guess what we came up with? 58% of Barbadians in 2007 supported it. The support level had dropped to 44% by 2009. However, in the final analysis, there is still the highest level of support, and I believe that it's on the screen. We can have it on the screen shortly. The largest number of Barbadians actually do support it and say that we should keep the 11+ exam.
So before you go on with some more with the figures, sure. Why you think that dropped from? That was a 1 year period.
No, 2007, 2009.
Oh, 2 year period.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why that drop from 58 to 44? I mean, what would have happened?
I think the reality is that these are issues which are changing. Support for flogging also dropped. What we find is that these educational issues are a moving target, and invariably people are now becoming more aware, largely because you have the Peter Wickhams of this world out there talking about the issues a lot and making points which are important. And one of the things with the 11+, one of the things with corporal punishment, what I would say is that you will find the most regressive aspects of our educational system receive the highest levels of support from persons who are less well educated, persons who are poorer, and persons who have been treated most badly by the system. So what we find is that persons who are most likely to be beaten, which is children who are in schools that are either newer or alternatively in schools that are not private, are most supportive of flogging, the parents of those children. And similarly, what we found is that the highest level of support for the 11+ existed among persons who've only had a primary education, people who have never had a secondary education. The highest level of support, when we break it down according to ages and according to educational levels, is among people who have had a primary education. Tertiary persons who have received the highest level of education, master's degrees and PhDs, are least likely to support the maintenance of the 11+, which basically says that the persons who are hardest hit by the 11+ are more supportive of it, and that's something that I find quite fascinating.
I do as well, because then it brings into what we were supposed to talk about this morning, which is the sociology behind it. Is it that people see the 11+ as some sort of gateway to better or to different? This
is the assumption that people make, and I chat with a lot of people like that on a daily basis. One of them wrote me a very nasty letter last week saying, you know, that the reason that I don't support it is because I'm privileged and I don't want people like her to have an opportunity. Ironically, she also went to one of the newer secondary schools, but she feels it is fair because it gives the opportunity that perhaps maybe sometime in the future her children can get to one of the good schools.
Yes, but Peter, we've heard from education officials, from edutech all the way down to interactive whiteboard technology, which is today, that the syllabus is the same.
Yeah. Well, the syllabus is the same and the schools are not. The fact is that the syllabus is the same. The buildings are almost identical. Government spends more money on the newer secondary schools than the older ones. They have the same numbers of teachers. The fundamental difference is that some of the newer secondary schools are almost like educational ghettos. You take large numbers of children with similar learning deficiencies, you throw them together in a school. You place that school in the far end of the island, and then you bus the vast majority of children who go to that school from the other end of the island on minibuses where they're listening to dub music and they're being entertained. So you have students arriving at school at 10 o'clock, shaken and stirred, and already with learning challenges, and the schools essentially become a bit of a mess. And then we were surprised that these schools produce larger numbers of criminals over the system.
So it's like the inner city syndrome, except that it's now out of the inner city.
Right.
But
yeah,
I'm curious though as to the reaction by some people who hear that the 11 plus should be disbanded. Are they not hearing the alternative, and what is the alternative that someone like you would put forward to an 11 plus system?
I mean, the alternative that I support, certainly the alternative that the Commission on Education, and I should make that point, the National Commission on Education has also said it should be discontinued and that we should have a system of zoning. The system of zoning basically means that all of the schools will start to be equal. We need to be creatively zoning. I always make that point, because if you zoned a school, you will move Harrison College, for example, from being from the sublime to the ridiculous, because Harrison College then will become an educational ghetto in a short space of time. We need to zone creatively to ensure that you have a mix of abilities in all schools, so that in no school would you have a large number of students who have a similar educational challenge, and that ensures that in every school you will have students in there that will have equal opportunities of doing well, and then the schools will genuinely become equal. It will take time, but you know, we need to get cracking. We've been at this thing for many years, and we've been backward about it for many years, so the sooner we get out of it, the better. Yeah.
You admit that it would take time, and one of the things that I suppose might be hardest to overcome is we're talking about the sociology, but it's also the psychology, because even if you zone schools, Harrison will still be, for a while, Harrison.
That's true.
And people would still want to think, oh, I should have gone there.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Well, I mean, there are options which the Commission didn't contemplate. One of the options is that the government can decide to take schools out. So, for example, if Harrison's became a school of music, for example, because I do feel that there is a role, and I think educators also agree, that persons that have a special interest in music, people that have a special interest in sports or special talents, special interest in science, we can have colleges of excellence that relate to these areas that can school persons in that way. So let's say if Harrison's and Queens, let's say you take the top two and the bottom two out of the loop, and you make them colleges that will specialize in particular activities, then you relieve yourself of that problem where you're dealing with other schools which then are slightly more equal. So there are ways and means of dealing with that. But you know, in the same way that we dealt with co-education, I felt we could deal with that quite effectively. And it's something that needs to be done. The problem is that the politics of it is so sensitive, because a government like this current one, which is hanging on arguably by the skin of its teeth, may say that it's too risky a decision to make now, because all this 58% of people who are supporting it may very well not be happy because they feel, you know, you're destroying my child's opportunity to go to a good school. Not realizing, as I said to that lady, that you do realize that by virtue of the fact that you come from a lower socioeconomic bracket, the probability of your child getting to a good school is quite low. I think that relationship is something that a lot of people don't realize exists, that there's a direct correlation between being in a lower socioeconomic bracket and lower educational attainment, and that is a statistical fact.
But this whole concept of good schools, isn't it gradually starting to change? Let's just take this year's top girl, Abigail Durant, for example. For all of her grades, she's going to St. Michael's School. That was a personal choice.
St. Michael's School is a good school.
Yeah,
years ago,
the
top
Harrison,
student went
Queens,
to Foundation. And I think Foundation is the best school, quite frankly. And it was interesting that the girl who got the top grades chose to go to Foundation and not Harrison's or Queens. And that happens. The problem, however, is not in relation to one or two students who may make a choice to go to St. Michael's, because a lot of people choose to go to St. Michael's for good reasons. The challenge is, when will someone get top marks in 11 plus and say, I will go to St. Lucie Secondary because I live next to St. Lucie Secondary? That's not going to happen.
That has to start from outside of the students, though.
Well, perhaps it has to start from outside the students, but the environment has to be created where it can be facilitated. And this is something which I don't know that we're making a start. We have brilliant students coming out of all schools. I'll be the first to agree. I taught at the university and I taught students from all over Barbados. The problem is that I am seeing, let's say 20 or 30% of students sneaking through, and they're doing very well. I mean, our cabinet now has the largest number of people from newer secondary schools in senior positions ever in the history of Barbados, and this is great. At the same time, however, I'm happy that 20% is doing well, but what about the 80% that doesn't get creamed off, that are left back in those schools, that are essentially becoming victims of the system? And it's a system that can fairly easily be fixed. And yeah, I mean, I think we really need to start soon to look at it.
I know that the survey would have shown that the majority of people still like the 11+, but wouldn't that be the beginning to the end of the problem if that is taken out and something else is brought in?
Or alternatively, nothing is brought in, because 11+ originally was a screening exam. You screen people to ensure that those who were good enough to get into comprehensive, grammar schools could get into grammar schools, and the others would go to comprehensive schools. The reality now is that we have places for everyone. So my question is, if you have places for everyone, why are you screening? Because nobody fails. Right. Theoretically, it's impossible to fail. So we could remove it and move people seamlessly from primary to secondary school, and this is get on with the job. And the trauma, the tremendous trauma, you know, the throwing up and the fainting and all of that.
We'll have some more discussions along those lines.
Hopefully, yes.
It's a topic that was very emotive and a lot of information to discuss in that. Peter Wickham, thanks as usual.
Pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Sorry about that. And we're going to move on with our program. We're going to take a short break and come back and discuss some more on Morning Barbados.